Yes. This evening we will continue where we left off. Yesterday I was talking about Cittānupassanā. It is the basic fundamental points of mindfulness, Satipatthana, mindfulness of consciousness. From the questions, some yogis has been asking me, I gather some things are not so clear because they are experiential things. It is regarding the three types of watching of consciousness, is explained by Mahasi himself. First is in terms of watching the consciousness as a whole. This is my opinion of what it means. As a whole, it's H-O-L-E, not H-O-L-E. As a whole. The sense of complete and full. That means you're able to watch the whole thing called the consciousness clearly at the moment. If your mindfulness and so on are not clear and complete enough, you will not watch it, you will not be able to watch it as a whole. Maybe only watch it partly, superficially. Just like you take a picture, who's the best photographer here? Yonggi-chan? Who's the best photographer? Lionel? No, you're not a photographer. Who? Anyway, you want to take a photograph. For example, you want to take a passport photograph. You must meet to certain specifications. Even the background, you don't know what color it has to be. So you take a photograph of this person. Is the head is okay, the legs you cannot see. Or you can see the head, but the top one you cannot see. Why? Because his hand is a bit shaky. And even when you take a photograph, you must take him in the most natural way. You don't take a photograph of him while he's making monkey faces. Some people when they take photographs, they try to be funny. They stick out their tongue, they close their eyes, they do all sorts of gimmicks, not a natural thing. So that you take a proper photograph, that means when you see the photograph, you know this is that person. You cannot be mistaken. That's why for identification purpose, you take the photograph from front, from this side, that side, the back, the top. Yeah? That's what they do. When I first applied for my long-term visa in Italy, that's what I went. They took my photograph front, back. As if there's not enough. They take 10 photographs, and they take the whole palm, all that they take, then they check. So that means it's more complete. It doesn't take everything, at least it's complete on the first level. Which means you have strong mindfulness, mindfulness is strong, you have clear comprehension, and then you watch the whole thing in the present moment, because it's closest to Paramattha Dhamma. So when it happens, you cannot be mistaken as whole. Unlike the photograph which have its edges, all these edges, nose edge, the consciousness does not have form or shape. It has complete characteristic, which means you have to not able to watch the knowing characteristic clearly. It means this is a mental phenomena and it's a consciousness. You go tick, 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 talk, 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 tick a talk, talk a tick. Sometimes they say, I'm very, tick, tick, talk, now there, tick, talk, I'll tick a talk, talk, tick a talk, talk. I say, is it consciousness? I say, could be anything. Not that you're not mindful, but it's not clear as to the characteristic. Yeah? So that's why somebody asks people whether there is a phenomenon. Is it consciousness or is it materiality or what? Could be, maybe, possibly. It's not so clear, right? And so you see this whole, this consciousness, bob, just like you catch the what you call the butterfly in the net, and you look at the butterfly in the net, this is butterfly. And what's this butterfly? This is the butterfly of Tan Chok Kwang's mind. Cannot be just consciousness. So then the other thing I talk about is consciousness in pairs. Pairs, that means they come and arise together. A pair can arise, and we say two peas in the same pot. You know what I mean? Two peas in the same pot. Conjoined. That means you see the consciousness as you watch closer, then you find that the other things come together with it, quite inseparable. For example, mental states. Mental states arise and pass away with the consciousness. The knowing mind arises and passes away with the noting mind. It's one of the first things I tell people who watch consciousness. So the consciousness is the knowing mind, which is the citta. The noting mind, this is that is rising, this is falling, and that is the noting mind, which is perception. And this should be mindful perception. So let's say perception is mental state, the noting mind, consciousness, knowing mind. They always come together. Yeah? They are called what? sampayutta dhamma, associated states, the kind of conditioning. It rises and passes away with it together. And yet, in a way, they're different. So the first is connected with, if you are very clear knowing the whole, you end up with the first insight knowledge. Nama Rupa. Clearly it is a characteristic of consciousness. Clearly that is the characteristic of matter. Okay, that means you see anatta. You know what's anatta? No self, or more properly called reality. Chinese terms. Then when you see watching pairs, you begin to see it more deeper. That it does not come alone. It is not independent. It's not doesn't exist with other things like the mental states. And so when you go there, you begin to look into the nature of conditioning or conditionality. This is theoretically speaking. Okay? Because at first you see one thing. Look, clearly there are more than one thing. There are two things. This is more than what you see. But in this case, in vipassana, it is not thinking or conceptualization. When you experience actually two things, there's conceptualization involved. Because 1, 2, 3 are concepts, numbers. What is one? Any mathematicians around? Cikgu, dia boleh dengar saya. Any teacher? Cikgu, dia bukan cikgu ah? Dia is cikgu. What is one? What is two? What is one? So is there really two? So the two is a concept. But here you experience as if two, but you don't experience two. You experience conditioning. You don't experience one as two. You experience two as one. There's difference. You experience one as two in concepts. When you experience two and one, it's still one. So it is conditioning. And so that means you're going deeper into the nature of anatta. This is not thinking, this is direct experience, pacaka. So when you see all those many things, you see a strong interconnectedness. You don't see only A and B, you see N. N, that means more than one. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, N. And N is actually one. When the experience, you see it as a process. That's why you see the third group is, when the first two is experienced clearly, then the third one comes into view. That comes under the perception of three universal characteristics. That means when you go to this, seeing things more as a process clearly, then it becomes closer to the third insight knowledge and above. Okay? So that's where the consciousness is watched stepwise and develops clearest when it comes to the insight knowledge of experience. It's not thinking, it's direct experience. And how can you experience three things at the same time? You can. That's a Paramattha Dhamma, ultimate reality. But in actual reporting and perception, you see it as inferential knowledge. You see it after that. You see, what's that? I saw that process. But still it's direct, because it's not thinking, not conceptualization. At most, it's the very beginnings of conceptualization. To give you a better idea of, experiencing as a whole, as a pair, as a process. This analyzing clearly for you to understand what it means. But short of actual experience, it's difficult to see, to say, to distinguish. That's why I said going beyond the second to the second and third and further insight knowledges. Cittānupassanā is very important. You can get to the second and third insight knowledge even with Rupa and Vedana, because they are conditioned. You see that? Because Rupa conditions Rupa, Vedana conditions Rupa. But Citta consciousness is more wide. You can see how one wave influences one wave. You have to see the whole water influence all the waves. Then you need to experience more. Okay? So that's why. But Cittānupassanā is not so easy to explain and to come about. That's why often you don't get to hear it. Not many people, I'm one of those people who explain to you in Malaysia at least. Because I don't strictly follow tradition. I strictly follow the Dhamma. Because some Mahasi people say, I didn't hear Mahasi speak to this before. I said, you didn't. I saw clearly the Dhamma speak about it. So, anyway, important thing is accordance with the Dhamma, Satipatthana. You do according to it, you practice, you see the results. Pasiko, come and see. Sanditiko, self-evident, then you see the results, and you see the effect of the results. You see 10,000 times, slowly come out better than nothing, but not very efficient development. Does it grow faster? It is possible. Depend on your parami, your vipassana, prodigy, genius. Okay, no need to say anything. You close your eyes, bling, bling, blong, 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 blong. You hear the Dhamma talk, you get enlightened from Arahant. Are there any Arahants here? If they know, that means you know a vipassana prodigy. You're hopeful. Hope, that's what you can do. At least you're hopeful. Some people are hopeless. This is worse than hopeful. Because when you see the consciousness clearly, you can see clearly how the consciousness and the mental factors are conditioned. The knowing mind and the noting mind. Usually when you're mindful of noting mind, yes, it's noting mind. When you're knowing mind, consciousness, knowing mind. But you say, do they arise and pass away together? No. Consciousness disappears, then the noting mind. So the noting mind disappears, consciousness is still there? It doesn't. So you don't see the conditioning clearly. You see come together. But you see conditioning clearly, then you know that at the moment the knowing mind comes, the noting mind appears simultaneously. When the noting mind disappears, the consciousness also disappears immediately. Yeah? When the object arises, the consciousness arises with the object. When the object disappears, the consciousness disappears with the object. You can see the conditioning of the objective conditioning clearly. Otherwise, no, I can see the object disappear, but my mind is still there. Therefore, I exist. The world around me that I see can come and go, but I last forever. Yeah? Well, because you don't see the consciousness disappear, you only see, then you identify the consciousness with me and my and I, my soul, my eternal soul, whatever. So you don't disappear. So you don't see conditioning. So when you don't see conditioning, then you don't go experience clearly the three characteristics. Similarly, one consciousness follows another consciousness. At first you see it's the same consciousness. The hearing consciousness, the seeing consciousness, and the knowing consciousness. Is it different or same? It's different. But you see, you're seeing, the hearing, the smelling, the tasting, it changes. But the mind is still the same. Because the seeing, the hearing, smelling, tasting, touching is still knowing in the mind. The mind doesn't change. The knowing mind is always there. So you don't see the impermanence of the consciousness. You don't see the conditioning of the consciousness clearly. So unless that happens, this conditioning with regards to mind and objects, you don't see. Right. Even with other things, between matter and matter, you see it because it's very gross. You tend to see something. This matter rising and falling are they the same thing? They're different things. Are they the same thing? Rising and falling, different things, isn't it? At least you see, but it's not clear enough to see anatta. So rising, how many rising are there? One rising, not enough. But see it as a process, rising, rising, rising. So the first rising, second rising, third rising, is it the same? Same. No, it's not the same. Beginning, there's no end. The end, there's no beginning. So you watch clearly that. So you watch clearly, you're not really watching the rising, falling anymore. You're watching the wind element process, the sensation. You watch the sensation as whole, and then you may get one thing. But whole is not enough. You just watch it in pairs, in series, so that you know it's made up of many parts. So that's where the watching in pairs and series comes with the feelings and the body as well. But without the consciousness, it's not so complete. This generally gives the idea why the mindfulness of consciousness plays a big part in the development of insight. Of course, when you say watching it in series, that means one consciousness, another consciousness, another, very fast. You see knowing, it disappears. Another comes knowing, it occurs in the series. That means the first consciousness is different from second consciousness, different from third consciousness, different from fourth consciousness. Pop, one after another. Then it goes very fast. Now, you look at on a wider scale, a more complex scale, then there are many types of series. Different moments, there are different types of series, and with different types of consciousness. Yeah? And so when you see all the different types of consciousness, then you see the serious effect deeper and stronger. That means you actually begin to experience it as a process. Which means you have to learn to able to distinguish clearly as you can the different types of consciousness. As described in the Abhidhamma, 89 or 121 consciousness. Beginning, you don't have to distinguish between craving and mindfulness without craving. Anger and anger without anger, but with mindfulness. Delusion and mindfulness, consciousness without delusion. Now you see the difference. That means you see clearly the change between mindful and not mindful. When you see the change between mindful and not mindful, you also see the change between mindful consciousness and unmindful consciousness. That means you see the difference between mindfulness and anger. So all this cut, you see clearly conditioning. When you see the cut, also you see the connection, what's connected with it. And the connection is seen as in the apparent conditioning from one consciousness to the next consciousness. And this continuity of the consciousness as a process. So you see that way. And then after that, this one is very, the moment you get better, and you not only see you're able to overcome the hindrances, then you see the finer changes in the consciousness. That means now you go to the more subtle changes in the consciousness, as described in the Satipatthana. It is tranquilized, or it is not yet tranquilized. That means calm, but not calm enough. Tranquilized, that means the five hindrances are totally suppressed. Then you go further, when your consciousness develops into absorption, then you see the consciousness with absorption and consciousness without absorption. The consciousness of different types of absorptions, and so on as you deepen. So, in that way, the mind is very able to see clearly the consciousness rising and passing away, changing in a flux. And when you go further into this third insight knowledge, when you see 3 as 1 or 10 as 1, then it becomes Tiranya Panjinya. Clear comprehension of full understanding of the 3 universal characteristics. And it's first as a whole is like the first 2, it is a Nyata Parinya. Clear, full understanding of the known and full understanding of the conditioning. These are the first 2. Call it the Nyata Parinya, full understanding of the known. Then you start seeing this clearly as you together with clear conditioning and process. Then you get full understanding of the 3 characteristics. And then after when you go into Udayabhaya and the knowledge of rising and dissolution, and beyond that, the Bhanganyana and the 5th insight knowledge. And then it starts going clearer into the 3rd Parinya, Pahana, the cutting. And we see all this process arising and passing so fast that there's only underlying it the reality of dissolution that underlies all these processes. Yeah, this is more difficult to comprehend and more difficult to experience clearly unless you've gone through the earlier knowledges clearly, especially the arising and dissolution. And beyond that, it depends on your clarity of experience of the knowledge of dissolution. You can see even in the Cittānupassanā, Vedananupassana, but for it to be very clear, very, very clear, which you eventually have to as you progress, even in Kaya Vedana, body and feelings, you will go through this as well. The Bhanga, the dissolution. The Bhanga has to see the dissolution of mind and matter simultaneously. And we see the mind and matter, knowing mind, the noting mind, and the wind element disappear until as if you're looking at nothing, you're looking at emptiness. So that is what we call the Bhangajnana. So this will give you a general idea of the mindfulness of consciousness and how it relates to your vipassana practice, vipassana insights, and the other four foundations. Okay? Now we take one step further. Talk of Dhammānupassanā. Cittānupassanā is difficult in itself. When we go to Dhammānupassanā, it's even more difficult. But not to say it cannot be done. It can be done. But at a more preliminary levels. When Cittānupassanā can be done at more preliminary levels. For example, I heard someone say, to practice Cittānupassanā, you must be at least an anagami. I said, I completely disagree. Because when the Buddha was preaching the Satipatthana Sutta, he was not preaching to anagamis. Which means that you can practice it even at a more beginner's level to some degree before it actually deepens. Yeah? Because when you say meditation consciousness at different levels. So in the very beginning, first you must be mindful, otherwise there's no meditation. You must be mindful, otherwise you know what is north, south, east, west even. So you're mindful, you're not thinking. You're not thinking, that disappears. Right? You're not thinking, it doesn't disappear. You're not mindful. Piao. Tidak makai pun, tidak. So at least you know, suddenly my mind is so clear. That means you're watching consciousness to some degree, although it's not totally and wholly until so clearly, but it's clear enough to see it for one short moment and it disappears. And a completely new type of consciousness arises. You don't have to be so advanced, you have to be persistent. Try to drop. Then it's experienced to some degree. And you don't do Cittānupassanā from the moment you see it until you fall asleep or you can still watch it in a more superficial manner. Like say watching it in the sixth sense source. In a more superficial, but still you're doing Cittānupassanā. You're not doing so deep. But when you go deeper, then you can watch the Cittānupassanā consciousness deeper and deeper at different levels for longer periods of time, and into deeper and deeper inside knowledge. then it becomes more. So to a friend, the teacher must be very high standard. Most of you are not up to this standard. But actually to know it properly, Anagami not enough, must be Arahant. How well do you know consciousness? At least understand everything of the Four Noble Truths. Then okay, Arahant. But you don't have to be Arahant to start practicing Satipatthana. That's the point. Similarly, Dhammānupassanā can be practiced in the initial levels. Yeah? You look at the Satipatthana Sutta, Dhammānupassanā is divided into few categories. Number one, hindrances. You know what the hindrances are? Tanjakwam, what are the 5 hindrances? Apa itu? You don't know, how come? You should know, you can meditation is so long. Yes, anybody? Kang, you should know. You don't know, I throw the stone at you. Sensual prayer, some more? Yes. Some more, one more. Not faculties, hindrances. Restlessness, how come you forget restlessness? So these things. Now the 5 hindrances. The second group are the 5 aggregates. What are the 5 aggregates? You know? Ukyakut. What are the 5 aggregates? Boleh ingat? Anybody? 5 aggregates. Siapa? Licu. What are the 5 aggregates? What? Yeah, correct. That is Chinese, bahasa Cina. Pali. Vedana, Sanya, Sankara. First one is what? First one, pertama. Rupa, correct. Then the third group are the Salayatana, 6 sense spaces. What are they? You know? Then that is the 7 factors of enlightenment. What are they? This one? Wow, bravo. Second? Third? Effort, joy, tranquility, and equanimity. See? It's becoming very smart. Apa?
Knowing mind, noting mind.
Yes.
Can the knowing mind, noting mind bypass the knowing mind?
Cannot. Tak boleh. There's a noting mind is a cetasika, noting mind is a mental state. The mental state always comes with the consciousness. Consciousness, but there may be some mental states that may not be present while the consciousness is present. How to bypass? When you walk to the door, can you walk with the head and not with the legs? Can you say, I want the water, but I don't want the surface of the water? Boleh? Boleh. When there's consciousness, there will be a mental state, but not all mental states has to be present. The 7 universes has to be present. The others not necessary. When consciousness is present, anger need not be present. Mindfulness also need not be present. But the perception as a noting mind has to be present, because it's a universal. Okay. So these are different, in one more group, Satya, truth, the Four Noble Truths. And so these are groups of Dhamma, groups of phenomena which share similar characteristics and a similar function and similar effects, and play different roles. So when you Dhammānupassanā, you study the phenomena in all its groups, and you see the relationship between these phenomena and other phenomena, and how they interact and how they rise and pass away. So this Dhammānupassanā. In actual practice, you have to watch them as actual phenomena first. So that when they arise and disappear, for example, when you watch hindrances, sloth and torpor arises, sloth and torpor. You be mindful of sloth and torpor. When sloth and torpor pass away, then the sloth and torpor no longer there. So the mind is free from sloth and torpor. When you do it in this way, there are 2 possibilities. One, you're watching the sloth and torpor, cetasika, mental state, tinamida, or you're watching the sloth and torpor consciousness. And you're watching the consciousness with sloth and torpor. The object is consciousness. When sloth is as the main thing. When you watch the sloth and torpor, you watch the sloth and torpor, mental state is the main thing. Similarly, when you watch the knowing mind and noting mind, you just know the knowing mind, the consciousness object. When you know the knowing mind, the mental state is the object. Right? So when you're watching the mental state, then it is Dhammānupassanā. When you're watching the consciousness, then it's Cittānupassanā. But in the beginning, people difficult to tell apart. You don't try to tell apart. You just know, knowing the mind arises, disappear. Good enough. Because in the beginning, the mindfulness is not so strong. You watch it more generally. When you watch it more generally, then you tend to be watching the consciousness, because the consciousness tend to be whole. But when you watch in more particular precision and detail, you watch craving and you see how the mind attached. I want this, I want that, I want that. So you forget the mind, you only see the wanting, then the craving. It's a mental state. You watch it clearly enough, the craving disappears. When the craving disappears clearly, the consciousness also disappears. But you are concentrating more on the mental state of craving. See? There's a difference. Mental state and the consciousness of rise and pass at the same time. When you watch one and the other, the effects are different. When you watch consciousnesses, you're watching more whole, more general. You're having a clearer view of the whole picture, scenario. Then if you watch more specific, like the characteristic of craving or anger, then you look at a more particular form of conditioning regarding the mental state, then it becomes more particular and more specific. And when you're good at that, then you're more particular and specific, able to see the finer details of what's going on with the anger. So which is better? Both are necessary. For a start, a more general one. When you go deeper, you have to go into the specific one. But generally both have to be developed. When both are being developed, then you bring Dhammānupassanā. Because Citta also comes under Dhamma. Vedana also comes under Dhamma. Kaya also comes under Dhamma. Cetasika also comes under Dhamma. So even Dhammānupassanā, you can say it, look at it in a more initial phase, then later in the three characteristics, in a more general phase, which is deeper. Okay, so if the different types of satipatthana practice. 5 gates when the mind is still gross. 5 hindrances, the mind is still gross. 5 gates where you overcome more completely the idea of the self. 6 sense spaces where you're able to maintain the continuity of how the mind runs at the 6 sense spaces. Bojjhanga is when the insights, the development of insights is being observed and how they arise and pass away as conditions. So that you have very more precise balance and more precise control of your car. And lastly, the whole picture, the complete picture, is experienced in the Four Noble Truths. Okay, tonight we stop here. Any questions? Everybody clear? Yeah? Okay, well. Huh? 大苦，不，他的名而已，因为他出世的时候有这个大苦在那个村那边还是什么？什么呢？ 看他在哪一个天呢？看他的命根哦，看他的命根。啊。可以，因为那个天界的命根跟人界不同，它很长，啊，但不同的天界的命根也不同。谁啊？对。什么啊？我那边他在那边入狱，就是那边咯。啊。把你把那就没有了咯，那就发什么生？对吧？还有什么发生？没有什么生都没有，不生了。Okay, no more questions. Stop here. Idang me punyam asavakayavaham hotu. Idang me punyam nibbanasa paccaya hotu. Imang no punya bhagang sabba sattanang Dhammānupassanā